On today's episode of Locked On Wild, it's time for 2024-2025 player previews. Let's start with Moose.
You're Locked On Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is happening, everybody? Welcome in to another episode of Locked On Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We are your team each and every day, and we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. On today's episode of Locked On Wild, we take a look at the 2024-2025 season for Marcus Foligno. We'll recap what happened for Moose last season, as well as some concerns heading into 2024-2025. We'll talk about his most ideal role on the team, as well as looking at some reasonable expectations and projections for this upcoming season. My name is Seth Topal. I am a credentialed Wild media member and have been host of Locked On Wild for the last 3 seasons. Glad to have you along board here, and hope your Labor Day weekend was a good one. Everybody getting back into the swing of things here on this Monday evening, gearing up for the rest of the week starting tomorrow. We'll have Alex Micheletti on tomorrow's show. We'll talk about Johnny Gaudreau, as well as one of the latest contract extensions that was signed. We'll see what sort of impact Seth Jarvis's deal could have on either Kirill Kaprizov or Marco Rossi as well. So that's coming up for you on tomorrow's show. But wanted to take a look here tonight at Marcus Foligno's 2023-2024 season as we kind of gear ourselves up for this upcoming season. We're going to go through every single player and look at what we can reasonably expect from them coming into 2024-2025. Now, for Foligno, his 2023-2024 season ended much the same as previous seasons have for Foligno. He played all told in 55 games, missed time throughout the year with injury, and then was shut down at the end of the season to have core surgery that he had on the opposite side of last season. So a couple of core surgeries for Marcus Foligno over the last 2 seasons, both on opposite sides. All told, Foligno had 10 goals, which was 3 more than he had in 2022-2023. He had 12 assists, which was 2 fewer. His 22 total points exceeded his 2022-2023 output. He was also a plus 10, which got him back into positive territory after being a minus 6 in 2022-2023. 59 penalty minutes in 55 games. We'll talk more on that coming up in a little bit. All told for Foligno, all of his points except for 1 assist shorthanded came at even strength. And so we'll talk about Foligno's fit on special teams as well. But some more of the stats. Foligno shot 17.9%, had 10 goals on 56 shots. So continuing to have a very, very high shooting percentage over these last few seasons. In fact, just once since 2019-2020 does Foligno have a shooting percentage under 12.8%. That was last year. So a rebound in that aspect as well. All told, average time on ice was 30 seconds fewer than last year, 14:29 this season as opposed to 14:59 last year. 40 blocked shots, which was the same as last season. 179 hits, which last year he had 237 in 65 games. So about 50 fewer hits in 10 fewer games for Foligno. over the course of the past 2 seasons. And some of the other numbers that we look at here, Corsi percentage, Foligno was at 45.2. And again, I just like to explain it for those that that aren't super into the stats world, and for those maybe listening for the first time here today. Corsi for percentage is all of the different things, mostly shots on goal, but all of the different elements that contribute to scoring. And so if you have a higher Corsi for percentage, like above 50%, that means that your team is possessing the puck at a higher rate and is contributing things at a higher rate that lead to goals, which is ultimately what you want. So being above 50% is ideal. Foligno checking in at 45.2% is not great, but as we'll talk about in terms of ideal line fit, a lot of that was lots of roster jumbling throughout the course of the season with players into the lineup, out of the lineup. There were just a lot of moving pieces for this Minnesota Wild team this past season. That is about a 4% dip from last season for Foligno, and continues a little bit of a downward trend over the last 3 seasons. Now, some of the other numbers that I like to look at, we're going to go to point shares. Foligno this past season had 2.2 total point shares, which was double what he had last year, but one of the lower marks that he's had since 2019-2020, since he became really more of a fixture in the lineup that season. Offensive point shares, he had 0.9. Defensive point shares, 1.3. Those numbers both bested what he did last year. But the thing that I also want to point out is that for Foligno, the expected goals for were at 22.9 with Foligno on the ice. With the expected goals against with Foligno on the ice was 19. Now you look at 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 2021, 2022, 42.5 expected goals for, 29 expected goals against. So we have seen over the last few seasons, Foligno just has not been part of a true separator line that can limit chances defensively and can, score goals and kind of create that wide separator. 2022, 2023, it was 30.7 goals, expected goals for, 35.5 expected goals against. So Foligno was in negative territory 2 seasons ago. This past year, he got back into positive territory, but not that gap that you would like to see for a guy like Foligno, who is more of a physical presence, but also is certainly one of the guys that is most expected to provide good defensive value for this team. On ice goals for per 60 this past season, 2.3 for Foligno. On ice goals against was at 2.8. So that was a little bit of a bump from 2 seasons ago, but the offense was much better. And if you go to what is, the outlier season for Foligno, the on ice goals for were at 3.6, and the on ice goals against was 2.9. So nice separator there. But that was, if you'll recall, that was the Grief line at the height of their powers. So they just weren't, nobody was scoring on that line. And those guys were all chipping in quite a bit on offense. So for Foligno, from a points perspective, he was able to mostly best what he did 2 seasons ago. But again, the big thing that it comes down to for Marcus Foligno is just the number of games that he's able to play. And this past season was the fewest games that he's played since 2020, 2021, in which he played 39 games. And he actually had more goals, assists, and points in that season than he did this past year. And so that's the big worry for him, is because he is a player that I think provides such a big impact when he's on the ice that it's hard to replicate. when he's not playing. And so if he ends up injured and is not able to contribute on the ice, the team suffers. And so that's going to be the biggest thing that we look at with Foligno as we go forward here throughout the rest of his contract and beyond. And so for Marcus, he's one of the alternate captains. He's a huge presence on this team, but a presence that needs to be on the ice. And, we'll talk about the penalties too, because not only on the ice, but not in the box is another thing. And so we'll talk about all that, how it factors in. But when we come back, we're going to take a look at the best role for Marcus Foligno for the 2024-2025 season. That is on the way as we continue today's episode of Locked On Wild after this. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by FanDuel. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel this summer, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we've got a little something different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. Just visit FanDuel.com to download America's #1 sportsbook. The NFL season starts up this week, so don't miss out on your opportunity to hit the ground running this NFL season. That's FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. Welcome back to today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. We are your team each and every day. Make sure, if you have not already, to enter into the Locked On Wild sweepstakes. You could end up winning 2 tickets to see the Minnesota Wild take on the Columbus Blue Jackets on opening night. We have the contest going all the way through the month of September. All you have to do is screenshot your proof that you are subscribed on YouTube and email it to lockedonwild@gmail.com with your name. We'll enter you in to the other entries that we've got. We've got a healthy amount of them already, which is great. We'll continue to keep those here throughout the month of September. And if you want to enter in, all you have to do is subscribe on YouTube, screenshot that you have, and send your name as well to lockedonwild@gmail.com. And you're entered in also as we try to get Locked On Wild to 3,000 subs by opening night. So full description of the rules is in the description for this episode. So let's get back to the Marcus Foligno season preview. And I started with Marcus Foligno because we haven't really talked about him at all this offseason. And so I'm starting these with the players that are pretty solidly cemented on this team so that when we get to the preseason and training camp, the remaining ones that we'll have will be the ones that are up for roster battles. So we're going to start with some of the guys that are firmly on this team. But as we talked about to start the show, the big worry for Foligno at this point, and it's because of the style of play that he is known for. He's very physical, very aggressive, but a lot of the plays that he makes are done to try to provide an energy boost. Whether it be getting into a fight, if a teammate, one of his teammates takes a hard hit, he's the likeliest to step in and try to fight. Now, if the Wild are lacking energy, he is one of the likeliest to go try to provide a big hit. And his goals over the last few seasons, 3 game-winning goals out of 10 total. He has a flair for the dramatic goals as well. Now, obviously, 23 goals scored in 2021, 2022, a pretty high watermark for his career. In fact, the closest that he's gotten to that number was 13 back with Buffalo. He has been a double-digit scorer 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times out of a total of 13 years in the NHL. So Foligno is much more known for his physical presence and his defensive play, which is why he has most commonly with the Minnesota Wild been a third-line player. And so if we look at the potential role for Marcus Foligno on this team, third line is the spot. You know, your top two lines are going to be the ones carrying most of the scoring. This Wild team, especially under Bill Guerin, has liked to have a line that can give you more defensive presence, a little more edge to their game, a little more, physicality to provide those quick changes in momentum. Like if you're starting off slow or you find yourself behind pretty quickly, I've had plenty of opportunities to see this from up in the press box. You throw Marcus's line out there, he's going to go try to hit somebody as hard as he can to get the crowd into it, to pull some of that energy back to the team on the ice, to be able to get them, if they're down by a goal, get them some offensive opportunities to be able to get back into it. So it's kind of a change. He's kind of a change of energy type guy, or a rally point for the Wild, in addition to being part of their leadership group. And I think one of their more outspoken leaders amongst Jared Spurgeon and Joel Eriksson Ek as well. Probably the most outspoken of that group. And so the leadership aspect plays into this as well. But the thing that I thought was interesting is you look at this Minnesota Wild roster, and if we go to time on ice while shorthanded, now, obviously, these guys have played various levels, various amounts of games. Marcus Foligno was the second forward in terms of average time on the ice while shorthanded per game at 2 minutes and 7 seconds per game. Joel Eriksson Ek was first at 2 minutes and 24 seconds. Now, Foligno didn't play. He played like 30 seconds per game on the power play. And so what I'm going to do as special teams coordinator, because you've got Joel Eriksson Ek, you've got Matt Boldy, you've got Kirill Kaprizov, you've got Matt Zuccarello. Those are likely going to be your top four forwards at pretty much all times. Now, depending on how the roster plays out, here's who I would like to see as your second power play unit in terms of the forwards. Marco Rossi's got to be on there. I'd put, because he's a shooter, I'd put Ryan Hartman there too. And then beyond that, if Liam Ogren is on the roster, he's on that second power play for sure. And I'd probably go for the speed aspect. I'd probably go Murat Kuznetsov as the other. But that's really kind of a take your choice. If you want a big body out there, because all of those guys, other than Liam Ogren, not particularly beefy. If you want a big guy, that's okay, that's fine. But I'm not putting Foligno on the power play a ton. And as far as the penalty kill goes, so you've got Foligno as the second most from a forward standpoint. So you bring in Yakov Trenin. And one of the key points in bringing him in was giving him an opportunity for some penalty kill time to try to help out that unit. We also heard some rumblings this offseason that Matt Boldy could potentially get some penalty kill time here as well. Because, you look at the guys that have played on this penalty kill this past season. And obviously you got like Brandon Duhaime and Connor Dewar, who played a bunch before they were traded. Murat Kuznetsov is certainly capable of playing as well. He brings some speed. I think I would like to try to get a little more speed on that penalty kill. And so maybe you don't have Foligno play as prominent of a role on that unit as he has in previous years. and maybe you just have him throw his energy into being a 5-on-5 player for this team. I would think that, depending on how these other options shake out, that'd probably be one of the changes that I would make. Now, obviously, on the penalty kill, you want to have somebody that can go get the puck behind the net and battle behind the boards, but you also have to have people that can go get out to the top of the zone and knock the puck free, so that you don't get stuck, you don't get trapped in front of your net, allowing teams the opportunity to just tic-tac-toe their way to a power play goal. So that'll be interesting to see if Foligno continues to get the special teams time that he has over the last few seasons, or because of the new options coming in, if he ends up getting that time reduced. But I would say his role for sure is third line forward, and if you pencil in Foligno, Hartman, Kuznetsov as your third line, more physical, defensive, but still with the opportunity to create some goals. I like that combo. I think that could be a very intriguing combo that could provide a nice little punch, but also the ability to score, because Hartman can score, Kuznetsov is fast, and Foligno can be the guy that goes down in front of the net, some of those dirty areas. So ideal role, line 3 for Foligno. And the main thing is just trying to get through as much of the season as possible without injury. Now, we'll look at some expectations, some projections, some just reasonable things that we can expect from Marcus Foligno this upcoming season as we finish out today's episode of Locked on Wild after this. Final segment of today's episode of Locked on Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day. We are your team each and every day. For your second listen today, make sure to check out the Locked on NHL podcast. Lots of reaction over the last few days to the tragic passing of Johnny and Matthew Gaudreau. Encourage you to go back and take a look at the episodes all the way back into last week. There's been a lot of really touching tributes and just a lot of reaction from our other Locked on NHL hosts. So make sure to check that out here today after you're finished with today's episode of Locked on Wild. All right, now it gets to the key part of the episode. What can we expect from Marcus Foligno for this upcoming season? And for me, really the only one that matters, honestly, is the number of games played. That is the hot button key issue that we are going to really have to keep an eye on here this upcoming season, because the number of games played, as I pointed out at the start of the show, has gone down each of the last 3 seasons. 74 3 years ago, 65 2 years ago, and 55 this past season. So what I'm going to do, just to kind of split the difference here, because a lot of projections are like, let's just take his numbers from this past season and go over under to see if that's possible. I'm going to put the over under at 60 games for Marcus Foligno for this upcoming season. It's a bump up from 55, and I feel like it would be a successful season for Marcus Foligno if he can get you up to like 65 to 70 games, because you are going to, as a more physical player, you're going to get banged up here and there. And so playing a full 82 game season, especially now as a player heading into his 33rd year here this upcoming season, it's just not as easy. because the injuries accumulate over the course of the season, and Foligno is one of the most physical players on this team. In addition to, throwing heavy hits, he's the most likely on the team to fight. That all carries with you through the entirety of the season. And we've seen over the last couple of years, it's pretty easy to tell when it's just a minor injury or if it's one that is more severe and is going to carry an impact for the rest of the season. And so it's just, you go from expecting 82 games to, if you can even get through the whole season and play somewhere between 65 and 70, I would consider that a win. I would consider, because what that means then is that he plays in 10 to 15 more games this year than he did last year. And if he continues, because his offensive metrics have actually, when put in the right position, his offensive metrics have actually been pretty decent over the course of his Minnesota Wild tenure. Now, obviously, isn't somebody that's taking a ton of shots. You're not putting him as like your top option, but he has been somebody that has been more than capable of producing given what he does in the offense, if that makes sense. Like, you're not going to say, well, he's giving us 11, 12 goals as a third line guy. Let's bump him up in the lineup. No, he's giving you, 10, 11 goals as a third line guy playing some good defense as well. That has value on this team. And so I am going to take the over on games played with 60. I'm going to take the over there. As far as offense goes, it's been pretty consistent for Foligno over the last 5 years. He has been pretty much like a punch card for 11 goals and 12, 13, 14 assists. And so I don't see that changing because, again, I think all the everydayers that listen to this show, I think we can all agree the 2021-2022 season was definitely an outlier from a scoring perspective because everybody on that team contributed because the Wild were one of the best teams in terms of even strength possession. They just continued to churn out chances. We've seen since that just was never going to be repeatable. But Foligno can be a 10, 11, maybe a 12 goal type player and around a 20 to 25 point player. And so I'm not going to go over under in terms of scoring and projection there because if he plays over 60 games this year, if he gets to 65 or 70 games, the offense will be there. And so I'm just going to, the only over under I do for Marcus is going to be over on games played. Now, one of the other things that I want to talk about with Foligno, because I mentioned he is one of the most likely, like if you ranked players as most to least likely to fight, he is number one on the list. Jake Middleton probably slots in after him. Ryan Hartman slots in after him as well. Zach Bogosian has fought in the past. But Marcus Foligno is the one that is going to call players out from the other team when something happens. And so that's another potential concern for injury as well. But then that's where the penalty situation comes in. Because I've said this regularly over the course of hosting this show. Fighting, to answer the bell for a heavy hit, those penalties don't bother me as much. But 59 penalty minutes in 55 games, if you take out the majors, there still have been some of those same penalties that plague everybody else on the team. The hooking, the slashing, the interference, some of those penalties that are done to try to overcorrect for a mistake. Foligno is one. I'll put Ryan Hartman in the same category of those guys that just need to keep an eye on it. Just need to keep an eye on where they're at on the ice because the guys that are involved in both sides of it, whether it be fighting or just, trying to throw a heavy hit. We saw this in the Dallas series in the postseason a couple of years ago. That big hit on Joe Pavelski that led to Foligno being ejected from that game like 2 minutes in. Or it was Rupe Hintz, I think. Getting ejected from that game 2 minutes in. Marcus Foligno's value is best on the ice and off the trainer's table and out of the penalty box as well. You're not going to completely eliminate it, but if he's going to rack up penalties for fighting and other such things, you got to make sure you keep the other penalties down. So for Marcus Foligno, what I'm hoping to see from him this year is to be able to just get through the season without having it cut short due to injury. That might seem like kind of a low bar, but with what we've seen the last couple of seasons, let's just get through the season relatively healthy, and let's see him maybe get back to a little bit of where he was at over the last couple of years from a defensive presence as well. It was better this past season, but let's see him get back to where he was maybe 2020, 2021, or 2021, 2022. He's not gonna get all that back, but if you can get somewhat of a shutdown third pairing or third line to be able to just throw the opponents off, especially when you're at home, that's going to help this team out. It's going to be something that they definitely need because, as we've talked about quite a bit, secondary scoring is going to be something to keep an eye on here this season. And so the biggest headline for Foligno for this season is let's just make sure we get through it. Now, best and worst case scenarios. The worst case scenario is just that there's some other sort of injury that keeps Foligno out of the lineup and out of the room in particular, especially if things don't go according to plan this season. He's not going to be able to help out, kind of call stuff out if he's not here, if he's not on the roster. So that'd be worst case scenario. Honestly, best case, as I laid out, is getting through the season relatively healthy and a little bit of a return to form, not a replication, because again, 2021, 2022 was an outlier, but a little bit of a return to form, at least in presence, is a win for me in Foligno's books. Now, key point here for the listener question: what do you think Marcus Foligno will be able to provide this season? Do you agree? Do you think there are other areas in which he needs to help contribute beyond goals and points? Let us know in the comments, and we'll compile and we'll discuss the best responses to start off our next player preview as we move up and down the list. But that will do it for today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, hope everybody had a great Labor Day weekend. We'll get back to regular flow here throughout the course of this week. So make sure to stay tuned so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. You can find all of our episodes on your favorite audio platforms or by subscribing on YouTube. So make sure to take your pick or subscribe to both so that you don't miss out on any new content throughout the week. We've got new episodes for you every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.